Welcome to In the Beginning. I'm Rabbi Jeff Solkin, your host. I'm the Executive Director of Kol Echad, Making Judaism Matter, here in Atlanta. On In the Beginning, we look at the classic texts of the book of Genesis, and we speak to local religious leaders about how those texts impact their lives. We're very privileged today to be able to welcome Rabbi Analia Bortz, who, along with her husband, Rabbi Mario Karpush, are the co-rabbis of one of the most exciting congregations in Atlanta, which is Congregation Or Chadash up in Sandy Springs. Analia, it's great to have you.
It's wonderful to have you here. Thank you for the invitation.
So our story today is a very important one. It's the story of Rachel and Leah. I know that many of our audience members know the story, but let's listen to it one more time.
And Laban had 2 daughters. The name of the elder was Leah, and the name of the younger was Rachel. Leah was tender-eyed, but Rachel was beautiful and well-favored. And Jacob loved Rachel and said, I will serve thee 7 years for Rachel thy younger daughter. And Laban said, It is better that I give her to thee, than that I should give her to another man. Abide with me. And Jacob served 7 years for Rachel, and they seemed unto him but a few days, for the love he had to her. And Jacob said unto Laban, Give me my wife, for my days are fulfilled, that I may go in unto her. And Laban gathered together all the men of the place and made a feast. And it came to pass in the evening that he took Leah his daughter and brought her to him, and he went in unto her. And Laban gave unto his daughter Leah Zilpah, his maid, for an handmaid. And it came to pass that in the morning, behold, it was Leah. And he said to Laban, What is this thou hast done unto me? Did I not serve with thee for Rachel? Wherefore then hast thou beguiled me? And Laban said, It must not be done so in our country, to give the younger before the firstborn. Fulfill her week, and we will give thee this also for the service, which thou shalt serve with me yet 7 other years. And Jacob did so, and fulfilled her week, and he gave him Rachel his daughter to wife also. And Laban gave to Rachel his daughter Bilhah, his handmaid, to be her maid. And he went in also unto Rachel, and he loved also Rachel more than Leah, and served with him yet 7 other years.
Do you have any siblings?
I do. I have 2 brothers, older brothers. So I'm the little girl in the house.
And what was that like growing up?
It was wonderful. It was the princess. You know, I have a lot of cousins. All of them are male. So I was the last one in the family and the little princess. So I got spoiled a lot.
Was there any rivalry between your brothers?
Between the 2 of them, there was none. But it's interesting that when I go to the text of the Bible, especially in Genesis, I see so much rivalry between brothers. I see jealousy. I see dysfunctional families as well.
We Jews, come from a major dysfunctional family.
Isn't that interesting? And we survive, actually. We are still telling the story. I think
because we've been doing therapy all
well,
these years.
it could be because of therapy. I think that Freud, have a perfect source that was the Bible. Even before Sigmund Freud, I think that the interpretations of all these dreams that Joseph has, and all the fact that that these dysfunctional families are bringing us an opportunity to look at them and to learn from them what we want to choose, what we don't want to choose. I think that those are human reactions, human emotions, and that is what maintains us alive. So it's wonderful. We look at them and I said, oh, that's my cousin there. And it's in chapter 35 I can find my cousin. And so it's good. It's a text that is alive, after 3,200 years. It's alive because we still can reflect ourselves.
We're used to looking at sibling rivalry in the book of Genesis, as you've pointed out, which turns us into a dysfunctional patriarchal family. We look at Cain and Abel, which was lethal. We look at Isaac and Ishmael, which was less lethal. Jacob and Esau, Joseph and his brothers. And now we come to one of the few rivalries between sisters, not the only ones in the Bible, but one of the few. Rachel and Leah, how do How do you figure that one out, Analia?
Well, it's interesting you are bringing that. Who provokes that kind of rivalry between two sisters? Is that Jacob? Is Laban? Who is lying? Who is deceiving each other? I think the deception comes because somebody is provoking this kind of fight. Maybe we can look at different lens through Rachel and Leah. Maybe it was Rachel that night that said, "This is not my turn." Who knows? Maybe she said, "I don't deserve this. It's not my time at this moment." It's interesting when we look at Rachel and Leah by seeing the fruitful Leah and the barren Rachel, and how much she has to work for his fertility, how they come together, and then how they start supporting each other. Then when we look a little bit ahead, and we can see Jacob looking at them back. We have Rachel and Leah, they both die. When Leah dies, Jacob takes her and buries her in the cave of Machpelah, which is the cave of his family, where his grandmother and his mother are buried, where his grandfather, his father are buried. When the family is buried, he takes Leah there. Rachel dies in childbirth, and he just buries her wherever she is. But he doesn't take her back to the cave. So at the very end of this story, we can say, who did he love more? Who was the liaison with the family? So I think that Jacob was very passionate about the beauty of Rachel at the very beginning when he is young, because all his hormones are there because of her beauty.
Beautiful.
But maybe at the very end, when he sees 6 children coming from Leah and a daughter, he goes back to his ancestors. So probably the relationship was a healthier relationship that we just get from the text. When we go deeper into that relationship, we can say that those years with Rachel were absolutely magnificent when he was in his youth, but at the very end, he takes Leah back to his family. So I think that sometimes we look at the Torah, at the Pentateuch, at the 5 books of Moses with different lenses, and we can understand that it's a different way of looking at the text according to the age of these characters as well.
I absolutely agree with you. I'm fascinated by that. I've always wondered, why is it that Rachel is buried literally on the road to Bethlehem. Leah is in Machpelah. And I love your interpretation. Of course, the way that Rachel and Leah are portrayed in our texts, very different. What's the physical difference between the two of them?
Okay, apparently Rachel is Yifat Torah, which means she's beautiful, she's very attractive, and of course she has a lot of strength because she's the one who is going to come to the well and help Jacob to take the water as well in the well. And apparently Leah has eyes that are dim eyes, and her eyes are the ones that really could translate into the wisdom that she has behind the scenes. So maybe it's this configuration between beauty and wisdom that Jacob is going to work so hard for. The other thing that we have about these women is that Leah is not so attached to her family when she has to live with Jacob. When Jacob is going back to the land of Canaan, the land of Israel, she's not so attached. And Rachel is. She takes the idols with her. She takes the teraphim with her. Maybe she was younger, and because of that, she was more attached to her father. She was not ready to leave. She takes something that will remind her of her own home. So that protection, that will be Adonai is one, and the teraphim, these idols, these gods with lowercase, are the other ones. So she's still in that umbilical cord that doesn't allow her to leave home. Leah is ready to leave. Maybe she was wiser. Maybe because she was older, she had more experience. She was ready to leave. Her family is now her children and her husband. Rachel is in between. She's younger, she cannot leave yet. And so she takes something with her. So I think that all of a sudden, Jacob realizes that Leah is the one that was ready to leave. And Rachel is still beautiful, but she's not ready to cut the umbilical cord. So maybe that's the reason she's buried in the road while Leah goes back to the ancestors.
It's interesting that as we look at the figure of Rachel, what Jews and Christians have in common, actually, is we have the Madre Dolorosa, we have the weeping mother.
That's true.
Christians, Catholics especially, revere the personhood of Mary, and we have Rachel who weeps for her children. And so therefore that she's put outside of the ancestral burial place is, I think, symbolic of our exile.
Absolutely. Prophet Isaiah will come with that. I mean, Deutero Isaiah will come with that. And he will see how, Rachel is weeping there. We have the concept of, let's welcome people from the exile. Here I am, buried in Bethlehem. Here I am in the outskirts of Jerusalem. Welcome you back from the exile. As I saw you leaving, I'm weeping with you. Because I left this world, says Rachel, when I gave birth to my child, to my Ben-Oni, or my Binyamin, my Benjamin, the child of my sorrow. So I'm here, left in the road, while my child is born, but is leaving me because I leave this earth. And then she's staying there, weeping for them to come back. So it's a beautiful gate. It's one of those Kafka's trial gates in which somebody is knocking the door and said, we want to come back, and Rachel is receiving them back.
And of course, in our tradition, the tomb of Rachel, which is on the way to Bethlehem, just south of Jerusalem, is a place of pilgrimage for women who are struggling with infertility.
That's absolutely correct. I have been there. I run a group of women that are struggling with infertility for the last 4 years. It's called Seeds of Hope. And when we discuss about fertility issues, we always mention Rachel. And there's a tradition to go to her tomb and to her grave and to ask God to bring us a healthy child, to remember us. And those tears of Rachel are the perfect reminder for all of us that God will listen to our prayers.
In the book of Jeremiah, it says that Rachel weeps for her children because they are not, and God says, there is hope for your future. I will bring your children back. I've always loved that text. It's classic Zionism.
And the children will come to their borders, will come back to their borders.
And it's interesting that that's one of the texts that we read on Rosh Hashanah, on the Jewish High Holy Day, the Jewish New Year.
Well, because Rosh Hashanah is it's not a way of celebrating with fireworks. It's a way of celebrating with challenges of life. So we start our new year reminding us that life is not easy, that it's very fragile. And so every single day counts.
When we come back, we are going to leave Rabbi Analia Bortz with great sadness, by the way. I feel the way Rachel must have felt, a sense of tearfulness. And we're going to look at the great art of the Western world that deals with Rachel and Leah. See you in a few moments. Welcome back. Earlier in our show, we talked with Rabbi Analia Bortz of Congregation Or Chadash about the fantastic story of Jacob and Rachel and Leah. And we came to understand that the story was in some ways representative of this great theme of sibling rivalry that takes place throughout all of Genesis. She and I were laughing about the fact that the patriarchal family could be understood to have been a dysfunctional family. Most of the time, the sibling rivalry that we experience in the book of Genesis happens between brothers. Cain and Abel, which is a particularly lethal rivalry. And then we have Isaac and Ishmael, Jacob and Esau, Joseph and his brothers. There is a dichotomy in each story. I have sometimes noted that the dichotomy appears to be that one brother is traditionally masculine and the other one is somewhat weaker. And yet, paradoxically, it's the weaker brother who becomes more powerful. That weaker brother being Isaac or Jacob, or for that matter, Joseph, over his slightly tougher brothers. It's an example of how brains can win against brawn. But when we deal with Rachel and Leah, the dichotomy, the split is not between two siblings, one of whom is strong and the other one is weak. Certainly not physically, anyway. No, when we look at the story of Rachel and Leah, the rivalry is deeper, and in some ways it is more hurtful. Let's go to the artists of Western civilization and determine how they understood this story. The first painting we're going to be looking at is the story of Jacob and Rachel and Leah as painted by Raphael. Raphael is part of a holy trinity, if you will, of great Italian artists, Michelangelo and Leonardo da Vinci. And Raphael helps us understand this painting by pointing us in the direction of this trinity that also exists within it. Jacob, Rachel, and Leah meeting at the well. It's a beautiful piece. I confess to you that I have difficulty understanding and determining which sister is which one is Rachel, and which one is Leah. But we know that the biblical story makes it very clear that Jacob thought that he was marrying his beloved Rachel, who is described in the book of Genesis as being beautiful. And yet, on his wedding night, he discovers that his father-in-law, Laban, has deceived him, that he has in fact married Leah rather than Rachel. And here we have a classic example in the book of Genesis of what the rabbinic sages called midah keneged midah, or measure for measure, or what goes around comes around. Just as Jacob had deceived his father Isaac when Isaac was old and blind, so too Laban deceives Jacob in the middle of the night when Jacob is blinded by darkness, thinking that he's getting Rachel, instead getting Leah, about whom we are told that she had weak eyes, or soft eyes, or damaged eyes. We'll get back to that later. We know that Jacob's love for his beloved Rachel was so powerful that he worked another 7 years in order to win her hand. We're going to jump over the centuries now, truly over the centuries, and look at a contemporary sculpture by the sculptor Philip Ratner. Now, what Ratner does in this sculpture is he does something that is quintessentially Jewish. Jewish artists have most often put their artwork and their creative abilities into ritual objects. In other words, while there is a certain tradition of art for its own sake, there is a strong Jewish aesthetic tradition of using one's creative abilities in order to enhance ritual moments of the Jewish year. And in this sculpture, we see that Philip Ratner has created a menorah. But notice, on one end of the menorah we have Leah, on the other end of the menorah we have Rachel. And we have Jacob forming the base of that triangle. He is at his plow. He is working yet another 7 years to win the hand of his beloved Rachel. But now let's go backwards a little bit. We're going to go back several centuries, but again, to sculpture. I want you to see this sculpture of Rachel and Leah as it is found on the entranceway of a church in Europe. The twin figures of Rachel and Leah were a very common motif in church art, especially in sculpture. Now, if you look, you will see that Rachel appears to be on the left and Leah appears to be on the right. Rachel is turning her eyes up to the heavens, and Leah is looking down. And you might wonder why it was that in the medieval church that the figures of Rachel and Leah were so prominent. It is a dark part of religious history that we now come to illuminate. In many churches and cathedrals of the Middle Ages, there were also figures, allegorical figures, ecclesia and synagoga. Ecclesia representing the church, synagoga representing the Jewish religion. Ecclesia, a beautiful woman with her eyes shining. Synagoga, a woman whose eyes are often downcast, looking at the ground, sometimes blindfolded, sometimes with a broken sword. And so, what is it saying to us that we have these two sets of twin figures? A sculpture that represents the church and the sculpture that represents the Jewish religion. A sculpture that represents Rachel and a sculpture that represents Leah. What it says to us is a message that has been rejected now. But historically, it is important for us to bring it to the forefront. In the mind of medieval sculptors and those people who turned their creativity back to the biblical epic and brought that biblical epic into the churches and cathedrals of their time, Rachel represented the beauty of the church. Rachel represented the vision of the church. Rachel represented, with eyes turned towards the heavens, of a church that could look towards eternity for victory and for validation. And the same was true of the way that ecclesia, this beautiful woman, was portrayed as well. However, when we look at Leah, we see that the weak eyes of Leah, as described in the book of Genesis, have become transformed into the weak eyes of, I say with sadness, the Jewish people. Judaism is viewed by many sculptors who work in churches during the Middle Ages as being lacking in vision. The church was triumphant. Judaism removed from the spiritual economy of the world. I show this sculpture to you, beautiful Rachel and a weakened Leah, to underscore how interreligious dialogue has utterly changed in our time. We at AIB take very seriously our mission to bring an interreligious, interfaith vision to the Atlanta community. Indeed, we believe that no single faith has monopoly on vision, on spirituality, and certainly not on moral rectitude. We believe those of us who relish living in a multicultural, multi-religious environment that is truly America today, that decent people of all faiths living in a certain amount of allegiance to their ancient traditions, traditions that are renewed all the time, can find holiness and spirituality and can find intimacy with God. I am proud to say that in my many conversations here in Atlanta with priests, with ministers, with imams, with people and religious leaders of all faiths, that we all believe ourselves to be in the process of a religious journey. We believe ourselves to be those who want to expose our own people and other people to the vision, the light, the sense of continuity that is found in our traditions without any need to denigrate the other. I'm happy to say, therefore, that this vision of Rachel as the church triumphant and Leah as the Jewish people whose vision has been dimmed, now can be thrown onto the dust heaps of history. There are no churches that I know of in America that depict Rachel and Leah this way, or that depict in allegorical form a triumphant church and a weakened synagogue. No, Jews and Christians believe that we march together. We have a common text, and in the beginning has been a way for us to look at the texts of Genesis, to understand them through Jewish lenses, or through artistic lenses, through the lenses of philosophy, and to understand that we walk hand in hand. It is true that we will not always agree, not often agree. Sometimes we will disagree passionately as befits the texts that we study, but we will always do so lovingly and with deep respect. I'm Rabbi Jeffrey Salkin, and this has been In the Beginning. We'll see you again soon. Shalom.